this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100. So, this episode I'm calling U.S. Elite Politics is a struggle between moral narcissists and sociopathic grandiose narcissists. So, this is kind of a follow-up to the last episode about defund the police and radical Rousseauianism among left-wingers and how that blocks them from seeing or from creating a politics that addresses the concerns of crime victims or potential crime victims of street crime, and not necessarily applied to elite crime, but also there are some weaknesses there as well. And this was an effort to encourage the left to develop such a politics and policy suite that would be progressive and also compelling. This episode I'm taking a step back and looking at what are some of the deeper issues in U.S. politics that lead to the dialogue, let's say, or the back and forth between the two political parties and two political wings as they exist, even though the left, we don't really have a real strong left wing. In the Democratic Party is run by centrist, center-right corporatists, and so it's in the elite area. It's a battle between the sort of center, maybe center left sometimes, but center left, center right, and the far right. Okay, now, and the increasingly neo-fascist Republican Party, and so, but still, some elements of the actual left, or let's say center left and left, get filtered into the culture of the and the politics of the center. Also, sometimes the right wing tries to link the centrists, the corporatists, with the left, and they sometimes, there's some cross-pollination there. So this dynamic, though, does apply some to not just elite politics, but also to the bases of the two parties, and so it's not entirely unrepresentative of the culture of the activists or the core constituencies of those parties, and particularly activists. But anyway, so I use the word moral narcissist in the title, and moral narcissism is a concept that is rarely discussed. It has been applied by right-wing, culture critics and used as a way to condemn the left wing, and it's been used to suggest that all ethical considerations really that motivate politics are vanity. Okay, as you can imagine, moral narcissism. So it's like they're saying, like the student movements of the '60s were moral narcissists, and and everything that came of that it's all about vanity. It's all about and it's not about real deal politics. Even though these critics really are not interested in any constructive criticism at all, they're trying to just take pot shots at the center left or Democrats or something, or liberals, and also the left, the actual left, but also they're trying to condemn the idea of ever having a conscience at all as being something that motivates action, having moral, ethical concerns, and that's laughed out of the room. It's considered to be unrealistic. It's considered to be the homo economicus, the self-interested selfish person that they assume everybody is, and that economists also assume everybody is, and therefore the cross-pollination between libertarianism that's based on neoclassical economics, and that they assume that everybody is this, greedy, narrowly self-interested person, and that anything that deviates from that is considered to be just, frothy, pie in the sky, unrealistic dreamers, and so therefore their attraction to the idea of moral narcissism. But it is actually something that exists. It is an actual problem. So I don't want to consign that concept and let it be dominated by these right-wing intellectuals or commentators, and it's not very, they don't use it very often. But anyway, it is a real issue and a real problem, I think, for the left, just as I was in the last episode talking about the difficulty of the left to grapple with predation by or criminal activity by ordinary people against other ordinary people, armed or unarmed, or armed with guns or unarmed, but anyway, but still some forms of predation. That's also not branded as right-wing terrorism, which also is a real problem, and we need to be discussing it a lot more in the United States, and also not only discussing it, the criminal justice apparatus needs to be prosecuting right-wing terrorism a lot more. But that's not the only kind of crime that exists in the United States. But anyway, so moral narcissism is as like it sounds in a way. It's like basically people who feel themselves to be superior beings because of their ethical, moral commitments, or at least their nominal, superficial subscription to certain language. Okay, so this is where sometimes we get into the language police and the idea of using correct language to signify that one is woke. Okay, and so this also and this gets into another concept called woke identitarianism, which I'll discuss in another video. But anyway, they're closely linked. But anyway, moral narcissism is a real problem because people who are very much involved in, for instance, left politics and liberal politics, they hang out with other people, or they often hang out with other people who share their beliefs or who resonate with those beliefs, and they don't see from the outside sometimes that they are considered to be pretentious or arrogant or just that they're. Now, there are people on the right wing who want to make those, who want to defeat the impulses to make the world a better place by calling it narcissism, or by not necessarily using the word narcissism, but just by saying, it's pretentious, it's like college kid stuff, it's like, whatever, it's the stuff, for people who haven't really worked or haven't really, run a business or something like that. And so they dismiss it like that. So anyway, so this and we see the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party's good cop role is, in a way, it attracts moral narcissists. It attracts people who use moral commitment or the language of morality. And again, I'm not these. It's hard to tell if these people really have actual commitments and are actually deeply. I think it's a superficiality. Personally, that's a personal view, but that the people who tend toward this parading of their virtue, okay, and using it for political ends, are are superficial in their commitments. In other words, that they're not really committed to those ideas. So it's not but it is a form of showboating, and it can, in a certain context, it can lead to certain power, be having power, and this is where, and often now this is on the left and the center in the left. This has to do with issues of racism and sexism, and the standing up for certain kinds of, or at least to talking about and claiming that one is on the side of certain types of people who have historically been victimized, or are now being victimized, or being excluded, or being oppressed by the current the current power structure, or the current cultural norms in some form or another. And so, but what, anyway, but this moral narcissism, it becomes attached to the self. It becomes attached to, there's a sort of a false self created that moral narcissists create. And so, and this is, so there's a personality psychologist called Paul Wink, who divided narcissism into two. I mean, he's not the only one, but in general, he's one of the people who have created this divide between two types of narcissism, and there are other people who subscribe to it. But there are vulnerable narcissists, and then there are grandiose narcissists. So so moral narcissists tend to fit more into the vulnerable narcissist category. So all narcissists have vulnerabilities and sensitivities to slight. Okay, you see. So Donald Trump is kind of like this, textbook version of a grandiose narcissist, and in fact, even a sociopathic grandiose narcissist. So he's borrowing from another category of personality called sociopaths, sociopathy, but and it's not uncommon for those two to go together. But anyway. But the grandiose narcissist is obviously this person who is totally self-absorbed, who is, and is also very, very, very sensitive to slight. And so as you see, Trump is frantically denying that he lost the 2020 election, and that is part of his sensitivity. And he has all kinds of, he's obsessed with the big lie, or generating the big lie, and he doesn't think of it as a lie, or if he does think of it as a lie, he thinks it's totally normal to lie that way, and he's totally entitled to lie. So entitlement is also another feature of narcissism in general. Anyway, so we have the grandiose narcissist, and then we have the vulnerable narcissist, is someone who at first doesn't appear to be this grandiose personality, but still has an enormous sensitivity to, and when you get to know the person, or that their ego, you realize that they have a suppressed big ego in some form or another, that they are also, and they're also sometimes quite masochistic. So they sometimes are people who are attached to grandiose narcissists. But they act the submissive, or the masochistic role to the sadistic role of the grandiose narcissist. Okay, so and so it's kind of, they're not everyday sort of people. You don't meet this kind of person every day, but they tend to have lots of symptoms and lots of issues and lots of personal struggles, and they don't necessarily present this grand, obvious face of false self. They have a false self too, but and also they tend toward, they have a great sense of injustice, okay, that they feel like they've been deprived of their true greatness, okay, so they're, as you see, they're kind of, there is a little bit of um, uh, the way Donald Trump talks about politics. In a way, there is this vulnerable narcissist side to that, in terms of talking about how America has been deprived, and how it's been victimized by, Mexican people and black people, and so forth and so on, and potentially by China, and always the victim, and so forth and so on. And so the vulnerable narcissist is someone who's preoccupied with victimhood, but which is not alien to the grandiose narcissist either. But the vulnerable narcissist is someone who lives out more this sense of victimhood. So you see, in a way, that so moral narcissism is often associated with vulnerable narcissism, and though again, we're talking very in very broad strokes, and someone who is not necessarily, I'm talking about a dynamic, not necessarily someone who's entirely of this personality type. But anyway, so the point I'm trying to make, or this dynamic I'm trying to outline, is that our politics is this dialogue between these two type of self-centered people. Okay, two types of and very, very self-centered people, and one of them are these the Republican, what I call sociopathic grandiose narcissists, who feel entirely entitled to power, they feel everything that they've been deprived. So sense of victimhood is there too. So and they feel like that they are always being persecuted by the dominant culture, but they also feel like they have this enormous and that they act on the sense of entitlement. They don't hesitate, and they don't appeal to some referee to say, well, I've been unjustly deprived of something. They go out and they just act on their sense that they bring the gun or they certainly say they're going to bring the gun to the school board meeting, and they are and they feel like, at least not all of them, but they're creating a culture, and this is the dangerous part, they're creating a culture where more and more of them will just act on their sense of entitlement, their sense of, and you could also call this, I'm not entirely happy with my characterization, you could call this white narcissism. So it is white privilege, okay, but it's getting into that word white privilege, it's kind of a little bit I don't like the way that it's being used it exists. It's something that you see paraded in a way by the people I'm calling sociopathic grandiose narcissists, but I think it's more dangerous than just this privilege. But it's literally people who are willing to break laws because they have the sense that they've been deprived, and they are really, and also that they feel like they are entitled to spread their illnesses, their COVID or whatever it is, to other people, that they feel entirely, so they're enormously spoiled, and anyway, but the opposite side of that is a complainy but passive, what I'm calling moral narcissists, who are complaining about how much they're being victimized by the grandiose narcissists, by Trump or whomever, and so they are not acting on, for instance, they don't take the reins and say, like, look, those people are breaking laws, let's prosecute them. I'm hoping that I'm going to be proved wrong, but we're waiting in some sense for Merrick Garland or whomever to start prosecuting January 6th plotters and elite, or at least starting a grand jury process, which will relieve the January 6th committee of some of its duties, or at least help and help sustain that process if for whatever reason or the likely possibility that this year the Republicans will take one or both chambers of Congress. But anyway, the passivity of the Democrats, to me, is the moral narcissist feels superior because of their victimhood, okay, and they are not the what I'm calling the sociopathic grandiose narcissists also feel victimized, but then they go out and they act in a way, but again, against the law. Because they're sociopaths, they don't care about law so much. They're very self-centered. They don't care about other people. Okay, they just go out and they just do, or they care about a certain set of people who they consider to be their family, and everybody else can go to hell. Okay, as far as they're concerned, and their family could be obviously their biological family, but also, you know, their ideological family, their club, so to speak. But they don't have a principled or, you know, idea about humanity, that they're human beings like other people, and therefore their spew, their, you know, their output in terms of viral load or whatever, it's like they feel like it's an insult to them that they need to check it, that literally so meanwhile, you know, we have this complainy, let's call it Democratic Party elite who tries to play up their victimhood to some degree. So again, both sides are playing victim in different ways, but they're not acting. They're not using their power. They're avoiding power. They're avoiding using the power that they have, and they're also avoiding a concerted effort, strategically, tactically, to get more power to do what ostensibly is the good. Okay, that they are setting up morality, which I think is very important, and ethics which is very important, as a weak and powerless thing in our politics, because they themselves are so attached to their sense of victimhood, and now this is where, you know, we get into more typical theories of our politics from the left, is that they're being instructed to lose and to be self-defeating by the donor class. That the donor class wants them to be the fall guys for the U.S. politics, or just in general, that they don't want ethics to dominate U.S. politics, or ethics to inform U.S. politics and the power exerted by governments and by the judicial system and a bunch of other things. They don't want that to be resting on a clear and consistent ethical standard, and they like the idea of a transactional ethics that just helps the powerful get more powerful. And so the idea of having these moral narcissists be the political front, they're good cops, is that it helps them cover up the power structure, and it helps them because they send out these signals of being caring and being, you know, and understanding that some people are losing in our society, and therefore, you know, they need some kind of help, but very, very incrementally delivering for them, and in very miserly ways, and very measured, but not measured using rationality, but just measured in terms of just stingy ways of basically giving them only a little bit, only a taste of help from government, and so just like you know, or being forced, and their arms being twisted to do things for the American people, ordinary people in America. So anyway, so so moral narcissism, is a real thing, I think, and it's not the same thing as having a conscience and having ethical guidelines, but it's using morality as a sort of a show, and it does also fit in very well with neoliberalism and with the individualism inherent in neoliberalism. So because it's all about you and about your individual career and your individual whatever. So moral narcissism, is also about individualistic virtue signaling. So this is where maybe a more accessible way to think about moral narcissism is about it was using the word virtue signaling, which is used often in different contexts, and people recognize it as something real. When you see someone always doing virtue signaling, they are often probably at least playing a moral narcissistic game, if not actually themselves being largely morally narcissistic, or whatever you want to say. However you want to say it. But the virtue signaling is something that that is a tendency, that is an impulse in on the left more than the right. Though you have virtue signaling happening on the right in a way, they just have a different set of values about what virtue signaling is. For instance, for them, virtue signaling is saying, oh yeah, we have to, they have to go back to vaccine denial, right? Currently, like vaccine denial and COVID denial, and if they ever deviate, for instance, Trump was caught off when he said that he was vaccinated and he thinks people should get vaccinated, but he's against vaccine mandates, and then he tried to virtue signal, and he's saying, oh yeah, vaccine mandates are terrible, the worst thing, and then he tries to distract from that, but so you do have that happening on other, not just on the liberal left or the center left, but it tends to happen more frequently on the center left, and it's in part because that show is critical to this role, this good cop role, and the alternative is that people actually use their morality as a compass to create policies that help make the society better, that help make the society more just, that and which includes, among other things, charging and prosecuting criminals, elite criminals, as well as other kinds of criminals, but and punishing them just fairly, okay, and that's up for debate about what's a fair punishment, but certainly you have to determine that some wrong was done or some law was broken, and so but anyway, but beyond that, morality is something, like people should live in dignity, or people shouldn't starve, or people shouldn't go bankrupt because of being sick. All these things are moral, ethical ideas and principles that some people have, and that are generally pretty lofty and pretty high, and but also pretty practical, and pretty, and it's about human dignity, and about, so those, to make policy according to those is not the same thing as to show off that one is a better person than another person. So this competition, there in moral narcissism, there's a competition, and there's a base level of virtue signaling that has to happen in some way or another. Like, people need to establish themselves as generally good people, and so, but it's better to get that out of the way as soon as possible and get on to substantive cooperation, work together. So to work on a project, to work together on, it could be in any context, not just in a political context, but to get together and work, become what the again, get fancy theory, psychoanalytic theory of this guy named Bion, to be a work group, okay? To become a work group of people who are working on a project, that is one of the better forms of being together and working together and interacting together certainly in larger scale groups. So anyway, so I hope this video is enlightening or interesting or provokes thought, and let me know how if you think this moral narcissism concept and this contrast between these two types of narcissism makes sense to you, is enlightening or not. And then also, if you like this video, please like it. If you're liking, in general, the content on Politics 2100, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.